Federico, we are here for a very special episode of App Stories, brought to you by our special WWDC sponsor, Collide, as well as Pillow and Sourcegraph. I'm John Voorhees, and with me, of course, is Federico Viticci and Alex Guillot. How you doing, you two?
Oh, hi. Hello there.
How's it going, John?
I'm good. I'm here in Cupertino. Actually, at the moment, I'm in Mountain View, but I was in Cupertino all morning, attending the keynote, going to the Steve Jobs Theater to see the new MacBook Airs. So we got a lot to talk about today.
You sound relaxed, refreshed. Is it the California weather? Are you already in a California mood right now?
It's partly that, I think, and it's partly the fact that I'm not sitting here madly writing about something at the moment. So I appreciate you guys taking that load off of me today. Well, why don't we get started? I mean, Federico, how would you like to handle this? Because we got four of these episodes coming up throughout the week. Mm-hmm. We're going to record them Monday through Thursday and release them on Tuesday through Friday. And we've got a lot of ground to cover. I don't think we can necessarily cover every single detail of the keynote this morning, all in this first episode. So I think we ought to maybe pick and choose and maybe even back up out a little more broadly, because I'd like to talk a little bit about just what it's like being here with WWDC in person again.
Yeah, well, I think we should start there from your context of being there at the event. And then maybe, like, my idea for this episode was to do, like, a keynote first impressions. And so I guess we'll do, like, the order of the keynote. And we'll start, we'll do iOS, watchOS 9, no tvOS, because that was not mentioned in the keynote, although it exists. It's out there.
Yeah, barely.
I believe it barely exists, and I believe, which is quite sad, because we have the tvOS guy, Mike Hurley, in the audience, saying the tvOS is so good.
I know, poor Mike.
But it wasn't mentioned in the keynote. It was briefly mentioned, I believe, in the State of the Union. And then we'll do macOS Ventura, which is a great name, I think, and iPadOS 16. But before we get to that, John, just say anything, like you're there at the event. What was it like? How many people are there? Who did you see? I don't know. Just you tell us. We're at home right now.
Yeah, no, it's been very interesting. I mean, it's very different. It's not like any WWDC I've ever been to. I came in very early on Saturday morning, and it was very quiet on Saturday. I got together in the afternoon with a few people, and then saw a few other people on Sunday as well. But because this is decentralized, there's no convention center, there's no particular hotel that everybody's.
Also, it's like Web3 for WWDC.
Yeah, it is. It's DeFi Redux. It's you've got people scattered all over Cupertino, Mountain View, San Jose, and all different hotels. They're not necessarily all around a convention center, because there's no convention center for this. And the developer center is not big enough for people to just congregate there. People were kind of hanging out in the visitor center yesterday. I know a lot of people saw each other there. The problem with that was, though, it became a traffic jam very quickly on Sunday afternoon. So I actually never went there on Sunday afternoon. I went elsewhere. But people are finding a way to get together, which is really nice, because last night I went to a developer meetup in San Jose. Do you remember when we had that pizza that time, Federico, in kind of that outdoor square area?
Oh, yeah.
A few 3-4 years ago. Yeah, that's where we went. We were outside. Everybody was outside, kind of gathered, enjoying themselves. And it really gave me that feel for WWDC all over again for the first time, where it was so nice to see people who I hadn't seen in 3 years and meet a lot of new developers whose apps we've been writing about, but you and I probably haven't ever met them because they're brand new to the scene. So that was a really great opportunity, and that's just kind of continued as we've had different events going on throughout Monday when I've run into other people. This episode of App Stories and all of our WWDC coverage is brought to you by Collide. Collide sends employees important, timely, and relevant security recommendations for their Linux, Mac, and Windows devices right inside Slack. Collide is perfect for organizations that care deeply about compliance and security, but don't want to get there by locking down devices to the point where they become unusable. Instead of frustrating your employees, Collide educates them about security and device management while directing them to fix important problems. Visit collide.com/appstories to sign up today. That's KOLIDE.com/appstories. Enter your email when prompted to receive your free Collide gift bundle after trial activation. At Collide, They know that end users are IT admins' most significant, untapped resource and key to solving the most challenging to fix security issues, including instructing developers to set passphrases on unencrypted SSH keys, finding plain text two-factor backup codes, and teaching end users how to store them securely, and convincing employees to uninstall evil browser extensions that may sell their browser history. Those are just some of the many use cases not solved by locking down devices. You can try Collide with all of its features on an unlimited number of devices for free for 14 days with no credit card required. Try it out at collide.com/appstories. That's KOLIDE.com/appstories. Our thanks to Collide for their support of the show. Fast forwarding to today, I went over early this morning at 7:30 in the morning to do a tour of the Developer Center, which is pretty amazing. I mean, it's really just an office building, but it's a really nice office building.
So
it's very
is it like WeWork but for Apple developers? Is that what it's like?
No, it's not like that really. It's more like a series of spaces that can be conference rooms or classrooms or like workshop type rooms, and they can be configured in multiple ways, each of these rooms. And we walked through a few of them. They're all different sizes and things. And they have these incredible, of course, they have this incredible acoustics where there's white noise playing in the background and really good noise canceling technology built into the room so that when a person is speaking, you can hear them, but you're not distracted by anything else. It kind of dampens out all the other noises in the room. And then they have these amazing screens so that you can have, like, for instance, Xcode running on the left and simulators running on the right, all in this really high, incredibly high precision, high definition screen where it's very easy to read the code. And that can be then running on the iMacs that are in front of the developers at these tables, which was really neat to see. And behind these conference rooms, there's like an interior corridor that we went into, which is where the Apple people are. And they had like these racks of machines that were loading OSs onto devices to be used in the conference rooms. And they had these screens explaining exactly what chair every developer was sitting in. So if they had a question or a problem, somebody could be, whisk in from the secret door on the side, come in, help them out, and then leave right away. It was really kind of neat. And then the whole thing at the end terminates in a big a theater, which is not a big theater. It's 180 people it holds, and it's got an amazing giant screen, which again is like, they said it was like 1,000 nits, but the width of an entire room. And they put it at 400 nits, and it was blinding almost. But it's got these robotic lights that they can coordinate to do whether there's a presenter in the middle of the stage or someone off to the side doing a demo or someone on the other side doing like a fireside chat style thing. It was really impressive because there's a whole control room that we saw with an enormous amount of equipment that runs all these robotic cameras and lights and everything going on there, including the sound, which was also really neat. So I think the idea is they've got one of these in India. There's also one, I think, in Brazil and maybe one other. And the idea is to bring in developers it's a little bit like Tech Talks, which I'm sure people are familiar with, which they used to do a traveling roadshow of kind of WWDC type talks around the world. It's a little bit like that, so they can do those things. They can also have Apple can invite developer teams in for meetings to either help them out with the new technology with their app or to work on something related to the App Store. So it's kind of a multi-purpose space, but it's designed to really create more interaction between developers and the company.
Dude, that sounds wild.
That's very cool. Yeah, that's.
I can't even fully picture everything you're describing. It sounds just like you're saying crazy things over there.
And the developer evangelist team works in this building. So there's a second floor, and that's where that team actually works day to day. It's the first floor is all these conference rooms and things for the developers. And I was telling Federico earlier today, there's actually this area right before you go into the theater that has music playing in the background. And they said, you see those benches over there by the windows? The reason those are plugged into the floor, into the electrical outlet, is because the benches are subwoofers.
What?
Which kind of blew my mind. I didn't sit on them to see if they were vibrating, but
Wow.
It was pretty neat.
And this is all outside the ring itself, right?
It is. Like, so if you've ever been to Apple Park, the visitor center is across Tantau Drive, and it's kind of a long rectangular building. And this is literally just down the street from it. It's like there's a street in between the two. So it's a long rectangular office building. It doesn't look like all that much from the outside because it's kind of blended into the landscape with all the landscaping they do around all these buildings.
Have you sat on the bench with this?
I did not sit on the bench. I should have. I really
Should
should
have.
have. Maybe I will when I go back.
Ask
I'm
him
going
to turn
back
on the
this
music
afternoon.
and sit on it. See what it feels like.
Turn up the bass.
But it's nice.
I need a massage. Turn up the bass.
Okay, so that was
Anyway.
this morning before the keynote.
Yes, that was yes, and from there we were escorted across the street, which is one of the main entrances to Apple Park, and we walked to Cafe Max. And the developers were all on the first floor, walking around, sitting at tables and things in the cafe area. The big glass walls that separate it from the outside were open, and as you look out those glass walls, there was a sea of chairs extending from inside the cafe towards a big stage where there's a giant screen set up. We, for the press, were sent up to the third floor where there was kind of a balcony overlooking the cafe where you could see all the developers and some food up there and stuff. And so we just kind of hung up there for about like an hour and a half until we were being herded and escorted to various places. So we were taken from there to our seats, which were kind of right at the border of where the wall is for Cafe Max. So we were kind of in the back of the crowd, pretty far back.
So, so you watched the whole keynote there, and it was just you basically watched the video alongside other developers. So, and there was like, what was it like? Like, were people cheering? Like, was it the usual reaction that you see from like a typical Apple keynote? Like, because that's so different from watching someone on stage versus watching a pre-recorded video with other people.
Yeah, it was definitely very different. People were very excited entering the room. I think everybody was just excited to see other people and being at an event. I think especially the developers, but even the press people who a lot of them had not know each other and hadn't seen each other in a long time. And in a way, I found getting around Apple Park very disorienting because there's all these long corridors and glass walls and stairwells, and people are saying, well, go here and then curve around to the left and go out this door and walk up the path. And it was a little disorienting being in there because everything's, curved and there's not these right angles that make it easy to figure out where you're going. But once we were all seated and getting ready for the keynote, there was definitely a buzz with the developers who were all up front, along with a bunch of employees who were there as well. And Tim Cook came out and welcomed, of course, said good morning to everyone and kicked things off. And Craig Federighi came out and said a few words as well. And then they just started the video. And the rest of it was, watching the video just like everybody else would do at home. And, it was pretty good, given that it was a very bright, sunny day. It was fairly easy for us to see, despite the fact that we were pretty far away and it was sunny out.
Was Craig wearing the tracksuit?
No, he wasn't. He was wearing his signature blue shirt,
Missed opportunity.
Were there security dogs?
I saw 2 or 3 security dogs, all good dogs. And there was a lot of security around the place. There was security around the perimeter, security along the paths. They had retail employees who they fly out. I think each store votes on the most enthusiastic person in their store, and they send them.
Right.
And it's like an all expenses paid trip, and they're there to kind of cheer and everything, which is a little bit grating early in the morning, but they're there to get the crowd excited and whipped up. And then there were also people in blue shirts who I think were engineers and other employees. And then there were, at least for us, there were PR handlers. Like there was a PR, it was a little bit like going to a high school graduation where you might have like a teacher at the end of each row. We had a PR person at the end of each row who at the end of the keynote basically held up her arm and directed us to go to the Steve Jobs Theater, because this is one of the things, they didn't tell us what was going on after the keynote. They just wouldn't, it was part of the surprise, right? So they wouldn't tell us where we were going. We thought we were going to lunch, but we ended up walking quite a ways down a path to the Steve Jobs Theater, which is where they had the MacBook Airs on display in the middle. And Phil Schiller was there. Tim Cook made an appearance. Saw a lot of the press people you would expect, like MKBHD, and there was a big crew from The Verge there and others.
Mm-hmm. What about food and drinks?
Food and drinks. They had very fancy food. I mean, I didn't eat very much this morning. I had already had breakfast. So in the press area, I think I had a chocolate croissant, Federico, and a little bit of water. And that was it for the morning. And then for the lunch, they corralled everybody back over to the Apple Visitor Center, which was closed to the public. And they had a spread of sandwiches and sushi and cookies and sodas and things like that.
Very nice. Okay, so and then you watched the keynote, and you didn't come back immediately because you were hanging out a bunch after the keynote.
I was, because I walked over to the Steve Jobs Theater, met up with saw some people, met up with them, hung out with Chris Lawley, hung out with a lot of the people we know from Relay FM, said hello to Phil Schiller, and looked at the MacBook. Took my turn looking at the MacBook Airs to see the design of them and really poke and prod at them a little bit. And then I walked back, had a quick bite to eat in the visitor center, and grabbed a lift back so I could do the show.
Very nice. Okay. So that's the context for being at this, the WWDC, new type of WWDC at Apple Park. So I just wanted to share some immediate reactions, with you and with the audience. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm writing at the moment as we are recording this. I just stopped because I was writing my iOS and iPadOS 16 overview. Alex is working on the macOS overview and the watchOS one. We're going to do the Mac coverage later because obviously the M2 chip was also announced, and I kind of want to hear from you, John, about this in a minute. So we're going to cover all of that. And right now, I have the iOS 16 beta on my phone and iPadOS 16 beta on my iPad Pro. I took the plunge immediately. So I've been able to play around just a little bit with both OSs. And I want to start from iOS. So I actually wrote this in the intro of the story that I'm working on. So my first impression here is that after last year's really quality of life update that was iOS 15, Apple has sort of gone back to shipping these sort of more sweeping changes for the experience, right? And that's what you see particularly, I guess, in two areas, and that would be the lock screen and notifications, because those two things go together, and then iMessage. But especially on the lock screen, I think the lock screen experience is going to be what widgets were in iOS 14, would be my immediate reaction to this feature. So the idea is that in iOS 16, there is this brand new, almost Apple Watch-like UI for creating multiple lock screens. And the idea is that you can create these different lock screens, you swipe between them, sort of like you can swipe between watch faces on the watch. And on each lock screen, you can have a different wallpaper. There's a gallery of built-in wallpapers that Apple provides you with. There's categories for astronomy, weather, different gradients that Apple made, Pride wallpapers, Unity wallpapers. It's all organized in categories. So you pick a wallpaper, and then it really branches out in two directions. You have the aesthetic component, where you can customize the fonts and colors, and you have the functional component, where you can customize the widgets. And the idea is that you still have the regular home screen widgets on the left side of the home screen. So if you swipe right, you still get the classic widgets. And you still have the flashlight and the camera buttons at the bottom of the lock screen. And those cannot be changed. But the idea is that you can put these small, compact, glanceable widgets above the clock and underneath the clock. You have these two slots where you can drag in these widgets. There's built-in widgets made by Apple for clock, calendar, reminders, all the usual suspects. And developers will be able to make custom ones using the WidgetKit API. And right now, it appears that there's only two sizes that these widgets can be displayed as, a rectangular shape and a square shape. So you can drag in these widgets, and they really are configured kind of like on the home screen, where you have a widget gallery, and you pick your widget, and you drag it in, and then you can tap it to customize the widget. So that's the idea, right? You have the visual updates, customized fonts, customized colors. You have a slider, and there's even the system-wide color picker, so you can choose your aesthetic. You can pick a wallpaper. You can use your own wallpaper if you want, or you can use portrait photos, which is another sort of thing that Apple kind of borrowed from watchOS with the portrait watch faces that Alex covered last year. And you can change the backgrounds. There's all that visual aspect, but then there's the functional aspect. And I think the combination of these two features will be really, really popular.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's really neat that there's an API for this as well, because it's not just like one of those things where it's an Apple-only thing for the system apps first, and then later, a year or two later, we get something for third parties. We've got third-party developers who will be able to do this too.
Yeah. Alex, what do you think of the I see a lot of things inspired by watchOS here.
Yeah, for sure. I was just playing with it right now. I got my old iPhone up and running on it, and it's definitely reminiscent of a lot of the interfaces that they put out for the watch last year. Mainly, that was the portrait watch face that debuted in watchOS 8. And it had this very similar kind of idea where the numbers or the text will go underneath part of the portrait picture. So whatever the part that kind of sticks forward can have text slightly underneath it. And then it looks like they've gone a lot even further now this year, where you can actually like pick up the kind of the cutout pieces of a picture. So presumably that would be, a person, or it actually works with animals, or at least dogs. I don't know if cats maybe too, or if anything else. But you can now take portrait photos of animals too, and then you can kind of grab them and move them around while you're setting up the lock screen faces. So all of that looks really nice, and definitely came from the portrait face last year. Which I think is all really, really nice. The portrait face was pretty nice. My only problem with it last year was that the interface for figuring out how to adjust it was really, really hard to find. And unsurprisingly, on the actual iPhone with the bigger screen, all of that looks like it's going to be a lot more discoverable. So should fix the kind of the major issue that the watch had when trying to implement kind of these more complicated interfaces.
Yeah. Also new on the lock screen, and this is like kind of difficult to explain if you don't have the visuals in front of you, but essentially the notifications are now docked at the bottom of the lock screen, and the idea is that they want to give more space for your wallpaper and your widgets at the top of the screen. So notifications are docked toward the bottom, and as they roll in, they stay docked at the bottom of the lock screen. You can, of course, swipe up to see Notification Center, and you can still long press notification to access the actions for that notification. But there's a couple of things that I want to point out here as well. So the first is you can actually minimize these notifications. You can swipe them to the bottom, and you will get this badge style UI. So, for example, if you have 3 alerts on notifications and you swipe them down, they become this badge at the bottom that says 3 notifications. There's actually a new setting, I believe, that I saw while I was poking around things. If you go into settings notifications, there's a new display as option that lets you view notifications. You can actually choose between count, stack, and list. So that's something that I want to play around with. And you can actually pinch, I believe, to change these different layouts on the lock screen. But the other feature is what Apple calls these live activities. And the idea is that...
Yeah, I want to talk about that.
So the idea is that there's some apps that... they send you multiple notifications in a row, especially for apps that display real-time information, like say sports apps or news apps, or something like an Uber or like a food ordering app, for example. So these live activities, they will give those developers the ability to have a single kind of widget-like notification that displays real-time updates. And during the keynote, Apple showed off this Uber live activity that is effectively like a widget that is actually a notification. It's a live activity docked at the bottom of the lock screen above your notifications that shows you the progress for the ride that you have requested in Uber. And I believe that Apple mentioned that the Now Playing well, I call it widget. It's not a widget, but the now playing controls on the lock screen when you have music or audio playing. That's actually a live activity now as well. And you can, it stays docked at the bottom of the lock screen, and you can tap it to enter this kind of full screen artwork mode that I thought looked very nice.
Yeah, that does look really nice. I mean, you can almost think of these widgets, at least some of them, the live action ones, as being almost like a progress bar for services, because that's very much what it's like, if you've ever ordered DoorDash or tried to get an Uber or a Lyft or something. And, right now you just get the little notification in the upper left where there's like the blue oval, and you know that something's being tracked, but you don't actually see it on the lock screen. So you have to kind of flip back and forth between whatever you're doing and the app where, you're waiting for your ride from or your food from. And this is pretty nice, I think, because you can just open your, look at your phone and you've got a progress bar of where things happen to be.
Yeah. Plus, you usually kind of get spammed with notifications from that services, especially as the driver is approaching or whatever. You'll start to get a lot in a row. And now, it'll be interesting to see how this is actually implemented, because what they were implying is that rather than getting notifications, you will just be able to look at your lock screen and see those progress updates. If you're not looking at your lock screen, then I'm curious if you still get the notifications, coming in like on your Apple Watch or whatever, and then they just get silenced if you have the live view open or whatever. I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how they deal with that kind of complexity, because obviously you still need to be notified when your driver arrives if you're not just sitting there looking at your phone screen. But I assume they've thought through all of that. So I'm very interested to kind of start playing around with that and see as apps start to implement it. 'Cause the other one they talked about was sports scores, which also seems like a really good use case for this, where you can just kind of pick up your phone, and if there's a sports game that you're interested in, then it'll just have the live score going on your lock screen, which seems really cool too.
Yeah, I think it's a really big deal for sports, because there are a lot of apps that specialize in updating frequently, so you can follow a game even if you're not watching it on television or something. And having it on the lock screen is just a nicer way to deal with that, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be so much nicer. Focus is getting a few updates as well. I haven't played with this at all yet. But first of all, you can now tie a specific lock screen to a specific focus mode. You can actually link it from the lock screen picker UI. There's a new focus button in there, and you can choose to, for example, say I want to see this lock screen when I'm in my work focus mode, and then when I'm back home, I want to see my personal lock screen. So you can now do that as well, kind of like home screens basically. But the other feature, which I'm excited to dig into, is focus filters. So focus filters is the idea that you can focus, you can filter specific app content, and there will also be a developer API for this to really show different types of content from inside apps based on the focus mode you're in. Now, actually, there are some built-in focus filters already in iOS 16. Obviously, these are made by Apple. But to give you like a sense of what you can do, for example, you can filter specific calendars from the calendar app to only show you a particular combination of calendars in a particular focus mode. So essentially calendar sets for focus modes. Yep. Or you can do specific mail accounts. So again, you are in your work focus mode. You can choose to only, to show you your work accounts when you're at work and your personal email accounts when you're back home. There's Safari tab groups. There's a people list for messages. I believe that dark mode is one of the system filters, as well as low power mode. So tons of freedom there in terms of really mixing and matching different filters, different configurations. We were all arguing last year, like, oh, Apple should make focus more intuitive. And it seems to me like they actually went in the opposite direction of like, okay, people want to have more controls. We're going to give them more controls.
Yeah, this reminds me of some of the wishes that we had, Federico, in our earlier episodes, because this is one that I know that you raised. And it's an interesting tension because it does make it more complex. And I was hoping that, though, that this kind of complexity, which we wanted, would be coupled with making it easier to set these things up. But I don't think that they've really done that yet. But I do think it's nice to have things that you can tie to a particular focus mode. Like you said, things like certain email accounts or calendars or tab groups or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, the one thing they did add that should hopefully make it quite a bit easier to set up. I'm pretty sure one of our members posted a picture of it. I can't find it right now. But you can actually toggle, I think, now whether you want your selection of apps to be a selection of apps that you do not want notifications from versus just a selection of apps that you do want notifications from, which should make it a lot easier to set up these focus modes. Because that was, I feel like, one of the main issues last year is you had to select, every single app on your device and say, no, I don't want anything from any of these. And then you add another app and you have to remember to go into your focus mode and ignore that app too. And it was just ultimately felt like, just a lot of maintenance to keep these things, exactly as limited as you want them to be. And if you can switch to being like, okay, this is a focus mode for work. I only want, these 3 apps to come through.
Oh, this is nice. Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. Yeah, this is basically like you have the inclusion or exclusion modes now. So you can say silence from or allow from. So yeah, this is great. You can actually switch between them and it's so easy. So you can build a list in a couple of different ways. Yeah, this is cool. Messages, and then there's a lot more we cannot possibly cover in the same keynote reaction show.
Right.
But messages I want to mention because of a couple of specific things that I'm so happy to see. You can now edit your messages, your texts in iMessage. And this is so easy to do.
It's so good.
Once you've sent a text, and if it's got a typo or anything else you want to correct, you can just long press the message, say edit, and you're going to edit the message, and it's going to say edited. So this is like, I joked on Twitter that iMessage got an edit button before Twitter, and this is totally the case. You can now edit your iMessages. And the other feature I want to mention is you can revoke a text. You can undo sending a text. This is something that I mentioned, I believe, John, on App Stories, that it was like inspired by WhatsApp. You can send a message and then you can say, oh, snap, I didn't want to send that actually. You can undo send. And I shared a video for this on Twitter. When you undo sending an iMessage, the message bubble explodes. So in a pile of blue shards, which is very impressive visually speaking. And of course, it says in the chat transcript, you will see you unsent a message. Other participants may be able to see the message on older versions of iOS. So I believe, John, right now, if you check out our shared thread, you will see the message that I unsent on iOS 16 because you are still on iOS 15.
Yep, I saw that. Yep. The other thing about messages, Federico, that I want to mention is SharePlay for messages, because I actually think I might use this once in a while. You know what I mean? Because you and I have talked about this in the past. There have been times when we've watched, I don't know, like a Nintendo Direct and just kind of chatted over messages about it as it's ongoing. And I could see doing this way. I don't really want to have a FaceTime call when I'm doing that. I want to watch the video. And I think having it by messages is going to be really nice for that kind of thing. Also for music, there are a lot of interesting use cases. It's just it's like, I guess, a subtler version of SharePlay that you don't need to actually be looking at somebody in a camera to actually enjoy a shared experience.
Yeah, and you guys left out my favorite feature of messages, which is marking as unread, finally.
Oh, yes.
Oh my gosh, I've been waiting so long for this. I hate it so much that I can't do this right now. I'm constantly forgetting to respond to people just because of, you click on it to read it, or you click on the notification, on accident or something, and then it marks it as read. And and then you have to, if you don't respond right away, you have to remember that and come back to it. And I am terrible at remembering that. So I always am just leaving people, on read. And I'm really excited that I'll be able to, undo that now, finally.
Yeah, that's very nice.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Pillow. More and more studies show that getting a good night's sleep can improve your health and well-being in more ways than you can ever imagine. Pillow is a simple app that can help you be more aware of your sleep patterns and make informed decisions to improve your sleep quality. All you have to do is wear your Apple Watch while you sleep. Pillow will track and analyze your sleep data automatically and give you a full report in the morning. And if you want to use Pillow with just an iPhone or iPad, you can do that too, with the press of a button before going to bed. If you have an Apple Watch, you can also get important information about your heart rate trends, variability, heart rate dip, and blood oxygen levels for each session. You can even record sounds like sleep talking, sleep apnea, snoring, and other noises that might affect your sleep. If your Apple Watch is a Series 6 or newer, Pillow also displays information about the intensity of those sounds during your sleep and gives you a rating of the exposure. Another valuable aspect of Pillow is helping you make informed decisions to help improve your sleep. Pillow comes with a dedicated section where you can discover trends, get personalized insights, sleep tips, and easily compare your sleep metrics with your weight, steps, caffeine consumption, and other health metrics. If you want to unwind and relax before sleep or listen to something throughout the night, Pillow comes with an expanding collection of sleep aid sounds, guided meditations, bedtime stories, and music produced specifically for sleep. Naps can help boost your focus, creativity, and overall well-being too. And Pillow has you covered there too with a powerful power nap mode. Pillow can wake you up using your iPhone, Apple Watch, or iPad at the lightest possible sleep stage using its smart alarm feature. Starting with watchOS 6, Pillow's battery consumption is minimal too. Last but not least, Pillow is also very privacy-minded. All of your sleep and audio data is encrypted and stored on your device and in your iCloud storage account using end-to-end encryption. You don't need to register or create an account to use Pillow. You can use it anonymously, and it doesn't collect or send your personal data anywhere else. Pillow's free to download from the App Store and comes with a set of great features that you can use every day for free. If you want to try Pillow's premium features, there's also an option to start a 7-day free trial. Just visit pillow.app to get started today. Again, that URL is pillow.app. Our thanks to Pillow for their support of the show.
There's a bunch more in iOS 16. I'm going to work on this for my article, but I want to switch gears and talk about watchOS 9. What's new in watchOS 9, Alex?
All right, watchOS 9. Let me pull that up here and refresh my memory. So a lot of this, unsurprisingly, was a workout and health update, as we've seen for a lot of years going now. But this actually is kind of a lot more going on for workouts in particular. Like I feel like the last few years we've mostly been seeing like the workout improvements are generally in the form of new types of workouts that are being introduced. And this year we actually kind of got a huge revamp of the workouts app itself, and it's added all kinds of new stuff. I'm fascinated to see as I start digging into this how they're kind of fitting in all of this complexity, because it looks like the app is still the same like 3 windows next to each other that you can swipe between that it's always been. But now they're adding, let's see, what are all the things? So there's this heart rate zones, which will kind of track the level of intensity of your workout as you're going. And you can, I think you actually set these zones, or no, it says here that they're automatically calculated. So somehow it's kind of picking zones for you. And then as you're working out, the watch will tell you like, hey, at this point in your workout, you should be, your heart rate should be higher than it is right now. You should go harder. Or it can also compare to your previous workouts and say, hey, last time you were doing this workout, your heart rate was higher here. Maybe you want to, push it a little harder or whatever. So that seems pretty interesting. And then you can also set up custom workouts, which can mix different ones together. So you can have like a warm up at the start, and then the actual workout, and then a recovery at the end. And you can kind of assemble those out of different workouts that you set up. So there's that. And then there's also looks like route tracking, which seems like it's going right at Strava. We'll see how in-depth this feature actually is once we kind of get our hands on it. But basically, it can kind of track on a map what your previous like run or ride or whatever was, and then it'll tell you how much time that you did it in last time, and you can kind of race against yourself in your own times and map those out, which is we'll see how much like social features that's tied into with Apple's social stuff, but that's kind of the main feature set that Strava does, except that it kind of publishes it for everyone to watch who are friends with you. So that'll be interesting to see how that evolves. Man, I feel like there's even more workout stuff that I'm forgetting. There's like, you can do triathlon workouts now, which I guess is that's probably similar to the custom workout setup where you can say, okay, first it's a swim and then a bike and then a run, and kind of set things up like that. So just a lot going on for the workouts. And then that's only like the first part. I'm thinking this is going to be a kind of the biggest watchOS update in years. The more I've been thinking through this.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah, the running part of this was really interesting to me as someone who has done a lot of running in the past, is that they're doing this AI thing where they're, just by the motion of your arm, they are figuring out things like the length of your stride, how straight, how much you're bobbing up and down as you run, I guess. Various different metrics to give you an idea of how efficiently you're exercising as a runner, and to kind of help you with that, but also then to help you set up things like zones. There's like heart rate zone tracking now too, which I know there are a lot of apps that have done that in the past, but now it's built right into the workout app too.
Right. And then, they also have this new medications app that I think people seemed pretty excited about. I think that'll be really nice for anyone who has to kind of take daily or weekly or whatever medications. You can now log all of those into the medications app on watchOS, and then it'll give you reminders at the time that you're supposed to take it, and you can check them off. And so that should make it a lot easier for people who have to take medications to remember if they've taken them already in the day. And make sure that they're not taking anything together that is dangerous too, because that's the other interesting thing it does, is it will actually kind of look at the different medications that you've set up in there and say, hey, there's a medical warning about taking two of these things together, or it'll also mix it in with like, definitely don't drink alcohol if you're taking this medication, things like that all kind of come together to a really nice new experience for Apple Watch users who need to track stuff like that, which I think is going to be just a lot of people. So that's super nice. The sleep story is improving. As far as I can tell, they still are not doing automatic sleep tracking, which is going to continue to really annoy me. And I don't understand how we don't have that 3 years in, when all of the third-party apps had that before Apple's sleep app even came out. But if you can forgive that, then they now are tracking different cycles of sleep. So they'll track, when you're awake during the night, as well as your REM cycles, your core cycles, and your deep sleep cycles. I don't know all of the nuances there, but the sleep app will help you figure those out. So you can tap into these things in the sleep app or in the health app on iOS and get it'll kind of walk you through what it's talking about, and try and give you a better picture of how you're sleeping at night and how you can maybe start to improve that. So that seems like a really nice new addition to the sleep stuff on Apple Watch. And then what else? We've got several new watch faces. A couple of them look potentially
What do you
nice.
think of those?
I think, let's see, what's the main one called? Metropolitan. I'm going to have to play around with it a little bit more, but it looks really nice at first glance, and it gives you a lot of customization around the color, and then 4 complications, it looks like, on the edges, which is not bad compared to some of their watch faces. They have a really weird one with like some number blobs with feet. I don't know what's going on there, but okay. They've always got some weird stuff with these watch faces. And then another lunar one. I don't know. Ultimately, I'm pretty interested in the Metropolitan one, and I'm expecting the rest of them to be, more that I look at and never think about again. No custom watch faces again, of course. Not that anyone was expecting that, but man, it would be nice. And and then the portraits face has been enhanced, as I think we mentioned earlier, with you can put dogs and cats on there now, so that'll be nice. I tried that last year, and it did not work at all. Even with a portrait photo that like had the information, I don't know, it wasn't quite what the face wanted. So I'm hoping that face is loosened up a little bit. and because I also struggled last year with getting portrait photos that would correctly like be enabled for that, even though it felt like they were pretty standard photos. And so I'm hoping maybe this year we can that'll be a little less finicky to get that set up. I think that's most of it here. We've got AFib history is another thing, so it'll track your AFib like heart rate monitors over time and kind of tell you, hey, you've shown signs of AFib for some percentage of the time over the last week or so. I'm interested in that too, because I thought the AFib stuff you had to actually run the ECGs with your finger on the digital crown, and I'm kind of confused how they're going to be tracking it over time unless you're just like doing that regularly. But some of these charts kind of make it look like it's just tracking this. So I don't know if they found out another way to kind of try to track that or not. I'll have to look into that a little bit more. Or otherwise, maybe you're just running ECGs like every day throughout the day, and then it'll now kind of give you a better look back at how at all that data that you've collected, which would be nice too. I think that's about it for the watch. Yeah. Can you guys think of anything I'm forgetting here?
Yeah, some Joe pointed out some updates to existing faces. He mentioned utility simple and activity analog. They get updated complications, and modular compact and X large. They got background colors. So they're doing some updates to existing faces. That's I think that's about it for WatchOS 9.
I think the calendar app too is fully redesigned. So we'll have to dig into that and see if that's any better.
Nice.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by SourceGraph. So you've hired a brilliant developer. That's great, but now you need to get them onboarded. If your company is growing, onboarding new developers will be a common occurrence, but it's also a big undertaking every single time. One of the biggest challenges for new hires is getting up to speed on the project that their new team is working on. This can be tricky if the code bases your developers are working in are already large. Thankfully, SourceGraph makes it easy to move fast, even in those big code bases. Developers know that knowledge is most useful when it's findable. Centralization is helpful, but given the fact that most companies store knowledge in at least 2 different locations, how do you make knowledge accessible to those that need it? As a code intelligence platform, SourceGraph gives developers what they need to drive their own learning over time and in different situations. Teams without SourceGraph need to rely on asking colleagues or reviewing out-of-date documentation, which is cumbersome and time-consuming. But with SourceGraph, every developer can search across millions of repositories to find specific code, saving time for themselves and everyone else. So that when questions do come up, you know it's the big stuff that's worthy of the extra time. SourceGraph was created to make developers' lives easier, and today they work with leading companies across every industry, including 3 out of 5 of the top tech companies, plus PayPal, Uber, Plaid, GE, Reddit, and Atlassian. Visit about.sourcegraph.com to learn more. Again, that's about.sourcegraph.com to find out why some of the biggest tech companies in the world use SourceGraph and to see what it can do for yours. Or just click on the link in the show notes to let them know that you heard about them from us. Our thanks to SourceGraph for their support of the show.
macOS Ventura, which is a cool name. Sounds Italian enough to me. John, I want to hear from you what you think of, obviously, Stage Manager being the key multitasking feature that Apple introduced this year on macOS and iPadOS. That was sort of our theory as well, which is if they are doing some changes to how you manage overlapping windows and multitasking, there's a reason why I everything I write is always for a reason, and my timing is never coincidental. And John and Alex have learned this about me over the past few years. There's always a reason I write certain things. There's always a reason I time certain things for a specific week.
Yes, you have to watch the metagame that's going on at Mac Stories.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. So my idea was, if they're gonna do this, and all signs were pointing in that direction, I bet they're gonna do something that is shared across devices, and that is exactly what we got with Stage Manager on macOS.
Yes.
Now, John, you are, and I guess Alex too. You both like your overlapping windows, so I really want to know what you think of this maybe simplified mode for people like me, as longtime Mac users.
Yeah. I like it a lot. I think this feature is an iPad first feature, and it's kind of a sign that, I know you'll talk about iPad OS in a little bit, but this is a sign that the iPad is now moving forward after having been stalled for a little while, and some of what is being designed for the iPad is now also being cross-pollinated with the Mac, because the Mac kind of already has kind of, moved to the left or right, whichever way you want to think of it, to meet the iPad part way. And I do find that even though I'm a person who likes to have a lot of apps open at any one time, I just do, and it doesn't bother me really. But it can be hard to find what you want if you really do have an awful lot open, and even just using like mission control isn't great if you have a ton of windows. So I like the idea of this. I really want to see how it works in practice on the Mac. I'm not super sure. I feel like this is a feature that I really welcome and can't wait to use on the iPad. On the Mac, I'm not as sure about whether it's going to be something that I turn to regularly. But I do like, for instance, especially the idea of grouped apps, so that, there are a lot of tasks that I do where I'll have Numbers open and Safari open and, I don't know, Messages or a text editor or something. And that's pretty consistent with a lot of things that I do. And I think that that's probably true of a lot of other people as well. And being able to tie those things together and get to them as a set very easily, with everything else kind of swept off to the side without actually having to close everything, is pretty nice, I think. So I just wonder whether it'll scale as well on the Mac, where the Mac, depending on how powerful a Mac you have, you may have 20 apps open. That's just not something that happens on the iPad. And I know that Stage Manager is limited in what it will show in that new kind of, I don't know if you want to call it like a Stage Manager dock or a Stage Manager sidebar or whatever it happens to be. But I think the way people use Macs is different enough that I could see it not being as useful on a Mac as it would be on an iPad. I just feel like I need to give it a try and get my hands on it, and I haven't done that yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I feel mostly similarly. I actually don't like overlapping windows much at all, but I use I use Moom on the Mac to kind of adjust my windows so that I can have multiple on screen at once, but that they always tile in and fill up the whole screen in total. And then I'm a big user of the Mac's Spaces functionality. So I'm constantly swiping back and forth between spaces, and I kind of already do something similar to how this Stage Manager wants to group apps together. Like, I have certain spaces that will always have a certain set of apps on them. And then I just kind of swipe around through those, or swipe up to mission control and switch spaces that way. Mm-hmm. And so I'm not sure if this will solve a problem that I have or not. The one thing that is really annoying with spaces is that when you switch displays, the Mac tries to keep all of your windows together, but at various times, fairly regularly, it will just lose 100% of its state. And not even just like put them all on one space. It will just kind of throw windows all over the place, at least for my setup, where I'm often running with, I don't know, like 8 spaces or more. And then I connect, my studio display now, or I connect the iPad in Sidecar a lot. So I'm connecting and disconnecting external monitors a lot. And, most of the time, maybe like 70% of the time, it works great. And then the other 30%, something is wrong and off in the wrong place, which is pretty frustrating. So if this new feature is kind of a similar idea where I can group things together, but then maybe if it saves state better and lets me kind of switch between those more consistently, even as I attach and detach monitors, then that might be enough to get me to use it. We'll have to see as we start kind of getting our hands on these things.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it'll be interesting. I mean, I do, Federico, despite the fact that I use overlapping windows, I kind of do what Alex does. I don't have that many spaces open, but I'll have like a space for editing app stories and a space for writing and stuff like that.
So you're not an overlapping Windows truther, is what you're saying.
No, I'll typically run an app in full screen, not full, like, not the Apple full screen, but filling the screen. Yeah, that mode is always, I've never liked it. And so I'll fill the screen with one app at a time, but I'll have a lot of things underneath it. Or I'll do side by side is probably the second most often thing that I do. I do like to have an app, give it a lot of space, even if it's a text editor and there's wide margins that are just blank. I just like to be able to focus on one thing at a time and not have things distracting me. So
Ventura, a continuity camera, I thought was impressive.
Continuity camera. This is interesting to me. I mean, here we have this fancy new display that has not such a great camera. So now we have a feature where we can turn our iPhones into our cameras and prop them up on top of our studio displays. I mean, I don't know that that's really the idea here, but I suppose you could do that. I think it's a good use of the camera, and it seems like it's a well thought out feature where it's going to support center stage and things like that, as well as the other features that the camera supports, like the portrait mode. And there's this new studio lighting effect, which I thought was really well done, at least in the demo. I mean, that's one of those things where whenever you have a good-looking model person in the picture and they change the features, it always looks great. Whether it's me sitting in my bedroom doing a FaceTime call, whether it'll look as nice, who knows? We'll have to actually try that out. But I like the idea, and I also like the idea of you get a FaceTime call and you're using it on your phone and you just flip it over to your Mac. That's pretty neat. It looked like what it does is it doesn't look like it changes you into the FaceTime for the Mac app. It actually gives you a window that's the shape of an iPhone window and plays it just like we're an iPhone FaceTime call, and maybe it's using the camera still from your phone. I don't know. I mean, that's another one that I want to try out. I haven't really dug it deeply enough into that, other than seeing what was on the screen.
Yeah. I think this is a really nice feature, but I also kind of feel like its existence highlights how much Apple is just starkly refusing to put a good camera into any of its Mac products.
Right.
I mean, you have a problem when you're teaming up with Belkin to create a stand that props up your phone attached to a MacBook. Like, I mean, I get it that these phones have incredible cameras, but also it kind of feels like fixing a problem by going, backwards about it. Like, how do we fix bad camera quality instead of building an actually good webcam by making sure that the iPhone works great with it? Like, I just think it's funny.
And they couldn't bring themselves to making the adapter themselves because it's such an admission of defeat. You know what I mean? Because it's so inelegant to have like a hunk of plastic propped up on top of your display.
But at the same time, like, you can make the argument that, of course, iPhones have better cameras because they're thicker and they have a proper camera module, and you wouldn't be able to fit that kind of a camera module in a MacBook. And so I guess it's actually like the counter argument is a clever way to use tech that you already have, because everybody has a smartphone. So why not use the smartphone as an accessory for, like, I don't know, it can kind of go both ways. It's like when they made it possible to scan documents with your iPhone. You could have said, well, why don't you just use a scanner? But everybody has an iPhone, right? So I don't know. I think it's funny.
It's overkill too, though. Like, nobody wants a professional quality camera on their MacBook. If they would give us a camera that is half as good as one of these iPhone cameras, then no one would even think that this feature is necessary. So I don't know.
Well, it is, but it does open up the for streaming and things. I think it is. There's a lot of apps like Camo and Detail and others that are doing this, and I don't know what it does to those apps, but it's I think that a lot of people do like to do their video conferencing in 4K. I mean, I personally don't care one way or the other, or maybe they're streaming while they're gaming or something. And so I think there are use cases for it. I just feel like it would be nice. I'd rather have it, the built-in ones be better, but you're right, Federico. The iPhone is right there and it's got a great camera. And so why not? This solution seems particularly well done, and it's tightly tied to the OS. So I think it'll be fine.
I just don't want Apple to look at this and be like, "All right, guys, job well done. We don't need to improve. We solved everybody's camera problems." Like, I don't think this is really a proper solution to the fact that their cameras on their Macs and displays are just bad. And I don't want them to say, all right, cool, we solved this use case that is, going to give a super great camera that a few high-end users need for some kind of niche tasks. But for the vast majority of people who are just on a Zoom call, the video is getting sampled down anyways. It would just be great if you could just have the camera that's on your thing do what you want it to do, rather than having to, mount your phone and then you can't use your phone at all during the meeting. I don't know. It kind of annoys me.
Well, that's true.
It's fine.
As someone who has used a Mac Mini for many years, I do appreciate this only because until I just bought a studio display recently, I have always found it a hassle to set up a Zoom call because I don't use a laptop in desktop mode. So I think there is a market of people who are using, Dell displays and LG displays and Samsung displays and whatever, that this will be good for. But it does seem odd given the juxtaposition with the problems with the cameras recently. But we should probably move on, Federico, and talk a little bit about mail, because I got all my wishes. We did our wishes, and I got them all. Every single one of them.
Yeah.
I got the scheduled send,
yes.
right? I got the scheduled send.
Yes.
I got reminders, which is one of those SaneBox features that I always thought was kind of interesting, where if someone doesn't respond to you, you can get a reminder that they haven't.
The follow-up reminder. Yeah, you got that.
So good to have that. Unsend, which is another one that is just kind of it's really table stakes for years now with a lot of third-party apps, but Apple didn't have that. There's there are rich links, and what else is there? I mean, there's also stuff for like missing recipients and missing attachments that, reminders like that. These are all things that a lot of mail apps have had in the past, but Mail hasn't. So now it has those. Plus, they said that the search is much better, and I know that that's been a really big pain point for you in the past as well, Federico. But if this Mail app is, and especially the search, is rock solid, I will be using Mail on every platform, because right now I'm using two different apps and I don't want to use two different apps. And my kind of extended feature set of what I need in Mail is really encapsulated by this update. There's nothing else really that I would want in Mail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just tried it, and I can tell you that the reminders, like being able to snooze messages for later, super nice. And search, like already in beta 1, it's so fast. It's kind of ridiculous how much better it is. Like, and you can and you get suggestions. Like, I see my recent searches as soon as I tap into the search field, and I just typed John Voorhees, and I found all your messages in like a second. And I have years of messages from you in here, going all the way back to 2016, and they're just there. This is very promising so far. I haven't tried it on iPad yet, but I have it on my phone, and it's really fast, and I'm super happy with this. And actually, it's nice that you also have a section for all your reminders. It's called Remind Me, and it's in there in the sidebar, so you can go in there and you can see all the messages that you've set to be reminded for later. So that's also very cool. What else is in macOS Ventura? Because I want to talk about iPadOS before we...
Yeah, I want to move on to iPad OS, but the one last thing that I would mention is Spotlight, because we talked about this a little bit on our macOS wishes, and we've got a little bit of what we wanted here. I mean, there are quick actions built into Spotlight now for things like setting a timer or setting a focus mode, which is really nice, or triggering Shazam to get the name of a song. And running shortcuts right from Spotlight, which is pretty cool. I think I will probably set this up alongside Raycast. I still don't think that this will replace Raycast for me, at least based on what they demoed today. But I would like to have some of these quick actions, especially close by. So maybe I'll make that control space instead of, command space or something. There's image search, and that's always been a shortcoming of Spotlight, that you didn't have the same rich search tools that you had in the Photos app itself. Those are built into Spotlight now. You can even search for text within images, and there are rich results, which I guess it's one of those things that'll find actors in movies, or get you the IMDb page for a TV show, or get you a listing for a business in your local area, or a movie showtime. There's been some of that, I think, in Spotlight in the past, but what they showed off today looked like it's been extended quite a bit.
Yeah. And then a clock app, right? Clock app on Mac.
And weather.
I believe is the first
one.
Yeah? Weather app is on the Mac as well. Yes, clock is on Mac and weather is on the Mac now. So
all right, well, that's good. I missed that. I'm glad you guys told me about that. I've always wanted a clock.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, you guys can't forget the advent of gaming on the Mac. Finally, is here.
Moving on.
Yeah, I'll have some thoughts on that later. I've been thinking about that quite a bit. Actually,
we have an entire week of shows, so save that for later. It's not,
I will.
We can't talk about gaming. I want to talk about iPadOS. I don't know if you were in the Discord, John, but this was a recurring meme today on the Discord. We really wanted to get to iPadOS Pro features, and Apple kept saying, "Now let's talk about gaming." And everybody was like, "Not again, please, not again with the gaming stuff. We just want to see the iPad multitasking." Which means I will now talk about iPad. I will now talk about iPad multitasking. So, first of all, I think it was really fascinating and also right how Craig Federighi framed iPadOS, which is we want to combine the best of iOS, the strong foundation of iOS, with the power of the Mac to create something that is so uniquely iPad. And that is like sort of the angle that John and we've been talking about all these years, like the strong foundation of iOS, make iPadOS as intuitive for most people as possible, with touch interaction, with Apple Pencil, and all that kind of stuff. But borrow from the Mac, like these Pro features that have existed for decades, and they are still quality, valid features that people want to use. Bring them over to iPad, but in the process, rethink them for the modern age and modernize them. And the result will be great. If you do your job correctly, the result will be greater than the sum of iOS and macOS. It'll be iPadOS, which is something totally unique and unlike anything else that Apple makes. And at a glance, that seems like iPadOS 16 is hitting that goal pretty hard and pretty well, I think. So the idea here is that, having played with iPadOS 16 for a few minutes, the Stage Manager UI, the Stage Manager multitasking mode that we just talked about for macOS Ventura, that will also be available on iPadOS. Right now, I think you can activate Stage Manager in a couple of different ways, mostly from Control Center. There's a toggle in Control Center where you can activate Stage Manager. I believe Craig Federighi also showed off Stage Manager being activated from a swipe from the bottom corner of the display. I couldn't get that to work, but I also think there's a setting I gotta change somewhere in settings. So the idea is you now effectively have 3 ways to use your iPad. You can use your iPad the old-fashioned way, one app at a time. That's still totally possible. You can still totally do it. Or you can do sort of the halfway, like what used to be, starting with iOS 9 up until last year. Split view, slide over, the shelf, picking up icons with drag and drop and creating split screen modes with drag and drop. All that is still possible. And you still have the multitasking menu and, the one that they introduced last year. You can tap it and you can say split screen in half. And then you have the resize handle. Like all that is still there. But then if you want to take it to the next level, if you're a pro user, you can say, that's great, but I want to use Stage Manager. And if you use Stage Manager, your iPad becomes this sort of Mac-like environment with the big advantage of you have a touchscreen. So in addition to having the pointer, You have this Stage Manager UI on the left side of the screen showing you windows grouped by app and your workspaces. Workspaces being these combinations of apps. So, for example, Twitter and Safari together, that's a workspace. And you can instantly switch between them by clicking on the window thumbnails in Stage Manager. But because this is a touchscreen, what you can also do is you can pick up those windows and you can drop them into a workspace, and you can, grab something and add it into whatever you're doing. And obviously, the big change from previous iPad multitasking modes is you have overlapping windows here, right? So what you can do is you can have 3, 4, I don't know how many. I tried 3 and it was totally working, but you can have multiple overlapping windows on screen at the same time. The system automatically arranges those windows for you. It makes the app that you're using automatically in the center, and it places others in the background, and it dims them slightly. So the system tries to arrange your workspace as much as possible for you, but you have full control over how you can resize a window. When you hover with the pointer over a corner of the window, sort of like on the Mac, you can resize the window diagonally, vertically, horizontally, or you can use your finger and you can touch the bottom left corner of a window. There's a new type of drag indicator there, and you can resize a window that way. And I posted on Twitter hello world screenshot with 3 apps on screen in floating mode with Stage Manager on screen at the same time, and it totally works. So I really like how, iPad OS multitasking is sort of like, think of a slider. It starts, at the very left corner of the slider, and you have, one app at a time. And then you drag the slider in the center, and you have split view and slide over. And then you drag it all the way to the right, and you have Pro mode with Stage Manager and overlapping windows and floating mode and external display support, right? So you can use up to 8 concurrent apps at the same time. I believe you can do 4 on the iPad, 4 on the external monitor, and it can be 1 external monitor up to 6K resolution. And you can use the pointer, obviously, to control those windows on the external display. Which is something else that John and I covered multiple times. We now have a pointer. That pointer can be used to control windows on a display that you cannot touch, which is an external monitor. What I also think is fascinating is something that I called a few days ago in Mac Stories Weekly, which is these features, they are M1 exclusives. So obviously, we now have an explanation as to why only the iPad Pro and the iPad Air received M1 support last year for the iPad Pro, this year for the iPad Air, and that is those are the iPads that are big enough to support this kind of multitasking environment, right? So Stage Manager and external display support M1 only, and you have to believe that iPad Pro, when it gets the M2 later this year, that that would also work obviously with Stage Manager. So, like I said, I've only played with this for a few minutes. I saw Apple engineers on Twitter say that they tried really hard to make sure that all iPad apps can work with these resizing modes out of the box. No updates necessary. I'm sure there will be APIs to optimize specifically for this, but I can tell you, I tried with Twitter, I tried with Discord, and with existing non-iPadOS 16 apps, and everything was working out of the box. And I believe the only apps that will require specific updates are the ones still stuck on full screen only. But obviously.
I could see some games, especially games being an issue. Although, and I wonder if this is related to the Metal 3 introduction, because part of that, one of the new features is this ability to scale from lower resolution graphics to higher resolution graphics, and it may be that that's what Apple's doing with these UI elements, at least the ones that are standard elements that can be baked into an iPadOS app. I don't know. We'll have to dig in and find out more about that.
Yeah,
and you can freely resize these with the drag handle too. It's no longer set sizes at all. Wow, with no updates. That's amazing.
There's a minimum size. At least I've seen like this minimum size. Like you cannot resize them to be like a super small square. Like there's a minimum size, and after that, it'll stop resizing. But yeah, you can. I actually made Twitter a large rectangular window, and that was funny. I could see only 2 tweets at the same time in my timeline. But yeah, wow. You can resize however you want, and it's live resizing too. So it's not it doesn't do the blurring anymore when you resize a window.
Very nice.
Oh, that's nice.
But yeah, I think that's a good way to think about this. Now, the iPad has a proper pro mode for multitasking. There's a step in between, which is what we used to have. Which is, split view and slide over, and the shelf. And there's, the basic mode. Well, I don't want to call it basic in a derogatory way, but just if you don't want to use multitasking at all, that's fine. You can just use full screen apps, and that's still totally okay. But I think it's fascinating to see this spectrum of experiences on iPadOS. And that is, I'm sure, the theme that I will touch upon again in the next few weeks. Obviously, there's a ton of other things. We got to wrap up here, and we got to do a segment for App Stories Plus listeners, but we will have daily episodes of App Stories. There's so much, John, that we got to talk about. Tons of updates,
we've got a lot
reminders that I want to talk to you about. And we have updates in Notes for smart folders and smart searches, tons of new filtering criteria, new shortcuts actions that I want to talk about. There's tab groups actions in shortcuts now.
There are? Wow, that's amazing.
There's actions to remove the background from an image. So there's tons of things we will cover over the course of the week. But for now, we'll stop here with these sort of first impressions. And John, take us home, and then we'll do a special segment after the outro of the show just for App Stories Plus listeners.
All right. I also, before we do the outro, I want to let everybody know that right after we finish this, we're going to do our first 2 giveaways of WWDC week. We have 2 great apps. We have both, let's see, who do we have today? We've got Home Widget, which is an iPad and iOS app for putting widgets to control your HomeKit devices on your home screen. And we have ReadKit, which is a fantastic gesture-driven RSS client. So we'll have both of those active from today through Friday, I think it'll probably be. So I'll activate those as soon as we finish here. I want to thank our sponsor for today and for an entire WWDC. There's a lot of work to put on, and Collide was nice enough to help us out and sponsor this entire process all week long. In fact, you'll hear about them a lot this whole month because they are our sponsor for the entire month on Mac Stories. I also want to thank our other 2 sponsors, Pillow and SourceGraph. And you can find, of course, me, Federico, and Alex all over at MacStories.net. Federico is at Vitici on Twitter and Instagram. That's VITICCI. I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWS. Alex is _ Alex Guillot on Twitter.
Yes.
And he has a different Instagram. He has a different Instagram, and I don't even remember what it is now. It's AJ Guillot, right?
You got it.
All right. See, I'm learning. AJ Guillot. So check out Alex online. He's there all the time. In any event, thanks for joining us today. We will be back again tomorrow with another episode of App Stories, digging deep on all the things announced this week at WWDC.